Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap and the concluding program in our two-part series on the theme of, with all due respect, restoring civility to politics and society. I'm Sam Rohrer, and here on this program, Isaac Crockett and I tackle the most important issues affecting you, the American citizen, the American family, the American governmental system, and the American church. Now, so far, we've dealt head-on with such issues as immigration and open borders, gun control, God and the Second Amendment, the opioid crisis, and most recently, how to successfully bridge the racial divide. And on this program, we don't just talk around the issues, we don't waste time shaping symptoms, we go right to the root problem. And through the four-phase lens of a biblical worldview, which recognizes these four central truths: first, there is God; secondly, there was a creation, an act of God; thirdly, there was a fall where sin entered the world precipitated by the devil; and fourthly, there is redemption secured by Jesus Christ. Now here we address the most pressing cultural issues of the day from a biblical and constitutional perspective. And we follow a simple approach capable of solving literally any problem facing our nation or any nation by applying a deliberate, biblically based diagnostic process consisting of four clarifying questions. Throughout, we ask this question: what does the Bible say, either in command or by principle? What does the Constitution guarantee or prescribe? What does freedom require of you and me? And lastly, what does justice demand from civil authority? So if you want to know the truth, if you want to know what God thinks, if you want to make sense of all the nonsense around us, stay with us for the next 30 minutes as together we walk through the darkness of today's seemingly unsolvable dilemmas into the light and the freedom of moral truth. Now, last week on this program, we introduced our current focus on the issue of scorched earth politics that we defined as this: a gladiator-style approach to life where winning at any cost is the guiding principle, and where the attitudes of civility, honor, respect, and love your neighbor as yourself are rejected and trampled. We talked about this mentality that's destroying our representative republic and coarsening our culture. We identified the root problem as the selfish and short-term attitude to living where God's sovereign will is either unknown or rejected, and Christ's admonition to love your neighbor as yourself is refused. Now today we're going to conclude this most important topic by going to the heart of the cause and the defining of the solution. Wouldn't it be refreshing if we could restore the mentality that winning is not the only goal, but also how you win? Wouldn't it be refreshing if we could restore the culture where love thy neighbor as thyself would be the guiding principle of politics and society? Well, in just a moment, Isaac Crockett and I will continue our conversation with the Honorable Jeff Coleman, former member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, president of Churchill Strategies in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and author of the book, With All Due Respect. Now, to help us focus on the intensity of this issue and that it's not something new, let's watch a short clip of Jimmy Stewart as he plays the role in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and engages in debate on the floor of the U.S. Senate as the gentleman from Montana in his fight against the gladiator-style approach to the political system of his day. His goal, and ours, to return civility, honor, and fidelity to this holy experiment in self-government.
I guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne. All you people don't know about lost causes. Mr. Payne does. He said once they were the only causes worth fighting for. And he fought for them once for the only reason any man ever fights for them. Because of just one plain, simple rule. Love thy neighbor. And in this world today full of hatred, a man who knows that one rule has a great trust. You know that rule, Mr. Payne. And I loved you for it just as my father did. And you know that you fight for the lost causes harder than for any others. Yes, you even die for them. Like a man we both knew, Mr. Payne. You think I'm licked? You all think I'm licked. Well, I'm not licked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these. And the Taylors and all their armies come marching into this place. Somebody will listen to me.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohrer, and here with Isaac Crockett and our special guest, the Honorable Jeff Coleman. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, and a growing network of statewide chapters leading the conversation in cities, small towns, and state capitals. Educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. And as Sam was already explaining a little bit, rehashing a little bit of what we talked about last week, in this segment, we want to go beyond the definition of the scorched earth politics and talk with our returning friend, I hope he's still our friend, and our guest, Jeff Coleman, about this, and not just so much defining the terms, seeing that we're getting away from God's sovereignty and trusting His providence in these areas, but talking about the cause and the causes, I guess, that have brought us here. So I guess, Jeff, as you were researching this, and you both have experienced this, what would the kind of the general, our cultural reaction to this be? What would most of the world say is the reason why we've gotten here when it comes to the political spectrum with, just candidates bashing each other and things like that?
I guess the reason that the people would give for the deterioration of the politics is because and it really is going to be from person to person, but most people say it's because the other side is losing, so they feel desperate and they have to endorse these kinds of tactics. But politics really at this stage is more of a reflection of the way the rest of society has disintegrated. So we live in an era where 30-second clips and 15-second clips on our phones, following the pattern of reality TV, kind of created a new reality that you're not waiting to fight, as the clip that we just watched from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, for the headlines to come out the next day in the newspaper. This is real time, real combat, and one word amplified in social media changes the world in a half an hour.
In your book, you go into this in a greater detail than we can cover right now, but some of the sociological parts of what's going on mixed with the technological. But as far as going back to our biblical basis, Sam and Jeff, we both know that the Bible gives us a compass for everything, and it talks about the individual authority, the family authority, civil authority, and church authority. We talk about those a lot. So let's take it down to the individual. And we got into this a little bit in defining it last time. But for the individual who's not, a politician, where did this come? There were a lot of choices that made us what we are in our culture today. And what is the individual's responsibility that caused us to get to this position where we're at today?
Well, I think the individual looks at political issues and says really weighs how their response is going to be. So if I believe that the people on the other side of the issue are wrongly motivated, or they are deceptive people, or they're bad people, they're just not honest, I feel then, I think this is what's happening in society, that I now have a license to treat them as if they were less than human. So you dehumanize, you strip off their family, you strip off their faith, you strip anything they believe, and you try to find in reverse the things about them that make them less desirable. So you find out, oh, they supported Bernie Sanders, or they supported Donald Trump. So their opinion automatically gets discounted by 50%. Then you find out, well, they went to a Christian university. And if you're a progressive or a liberal, you say, well, that's not a real school. You get knocked down a peg. And you just go through everything, where you're comparing the way you live your life with the way they live their life. If it's not compatible, you have too many kids, you send them to Christian school, not public school, whatever it is. That friction emerges in real life, and then it spills over into politics. And you feel like you can do anything you want.
It's scary. We talked about that last time with Dr. Joe Green, about how that goes into the racial tensions. My grandfather living through the Dutch underground with Hitler, these objectifying our opponents. So what do we do in our family, Sam? You're a family man, 6 children, over a dozen grandchildren. You see this going. What has happened in our families that has caused this sort of thing to be an effect to it? To our culture?
I think, Isaac, that in part, the concept of civility or treating others as we would like to be treated is factored into this, in that within the family. I mean, I think you can't get away from the fact that when we have divorce rates as high as they've been in this country, that it has developed an attitude not of a cohesive, loving one, but one rather of an almost an enemy perspective, and as a result of it, I think our children pick up an attitude of disrespect that actually carries through and manifests itself in a way, in a lot of these ways that we're talking about here today, and it's an attitude. It's an attitude where we put aside what God is and who He is and how He thinks. And we don't view people as creations of God, and we come at it in a different perspective, and a lot of that is fostered right out of the home, and I think it's ultimately manifested on the political scene.
So that's important, Sam, because the way that we as parents interact with TV, the way that we talk about the candidates we don't like on the screen, what we say when a mailer comes in and it's not from our team, it's from the other side, and we rip it up and with some choice words put it in the trash. You are saying, I got a mailer from someone this year that said, take out the trash, and they had an image of another politician in the garbage can. They were the trash. And you think, well, that's a subtle message, but if we believe in this image of God stuff, which we do, we're not trashing people, and we're not doing it figuratively, and we're not doing it to each other.
Wow. So we have individuals and their responsibility in this, families, parents, what that has happened. What about civil authority? And I know we talked about that some with the definition of it, and we don't have a lot of time in the segment, but just a real quick, where did the civil authorities work in this?
Well, just take it from the place that Sam and I worked in, the Pennsylvania Capitol. There's a rule book, a guidebook that says I have to call, I can't call Sam by Sam's name, and he can't call me Jeff. I have to say the gentleman from Berks County, and he says the gentleman from Armstrong County. All of that was written into the rules because the founding generation knew how susceptible we were to knowing something about each other that we didn't find respectful or respect-worthy, and then that debate would then carry out onto the floor, and we would be unkind to each other. We almost have to put up these artificial fences to say, I'm going to live by a certain rule of manner and courtesy, not because I know everything about them, but because they're human beings. They're afforded that. Then we can have a discussion, but it really starts there.
And Sam, as we finish up, then the last one is the church. Has the church had anything to do with us being where we're at with this, negative political atmosphere?
Well, I think it has, because ultimately, the church is the foundation we know biblically to convey truth that all men are created in God's on His image. Now, we talk about a biblical worldview here. There is a God. There was a creation, an act of God, but there was a fall where sin entered the world. That's sin. Where do we get this negative idea of how we attack people? That's because of sin. Who is the communicator of that? It is the church. The church must be the communicator. And when that's failed to be done, we don't have respect for each other, which is a great title for your book, With All Due Respect. Why do we respect anyone? It's because we're made in God's image. Yes, there's sin. Yes, there's a fall. Yes, there's a lot to complain about. But there's redemption through Jesus Christ who can make us whole And you're no better than I am.
That's right.
No better than you. In God's image, we are equal, and God loves us all. That mentality is what the church must communicate, and when the pulpit fails to communicate that, then you have a dog-eat-dog mentality, which ultimately I think is unfortunately where we've come.
And it is unfortunate that's where we are, but it is a fortunate thing that we have the Word of God to help us find where we ought to be. So please stay tuned as we come back with more solutions to this issue of the political culture that we are in these days.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and we are in the midst of a most current and poignant issue, and that is negative campaigning, scorched earth campaigning that actually has spilled over into society. We've been dealing with how we got here, and in this segment, we're going to talk more about the issue of solutions. Are we literally condemned to this negative type mentality that we see all about us in the culture? Or is there hope? Well, in the book, with all due respect, our guest, the Honorable Jeff Coleman, I'm going to turn over here right now to you. You wrote the book, you gave it a good title, With All Due Respect. In the last segment, we talked a little bit about the concept that we respect because we're made in God's image. Yeah. But that's a peculiarly Christian view.
It is.
And but you had 5 chapters in your book, and let me just name quickly the chapters. I thought it was good, and I also want you to say how people can get it. Mm-hmm. But the first chapter was humility. Mm-hmm. Second was decorum. Third, idealism. Fourth, truth. Mm-hmm. And the last, courage. All fantastic titles and themes. Tell me just a little bit about those, why you chose those 5 as solutions to this issue, which everybody knows about and can see, and where they can find the book.
Well, I guess humility was probably the cornerstone of the whole thing, because if you can't find a way to believe that someone is as valuable or more valuable, which is really putting yourself underneath another person.
And really, Jeff, is that not because of our view of God?
Of course it is. Yeah, of course it is.
So you're going right there and saying biblical solutions.
It is.
You're going to work it out.
Yeah,
okay.
if you're not willing to be put under any kind of personal authority. I mean, the founding generation talked about self-governors. If you're not able to regulate yourself, you're going to make the rules up as you go. Without humility, you cannot approach the public service and the political process. Decorum. This is an old idea that there is a way to do things. We do it Robert's Rules of Order, the way you run your Legion Hall, your VFW.
The biblical concept of do all things decently and in order.
Absolutely,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And in the founding generation, when Thomas Jefferson wrote the rules that are incorporated into Mason's Manual, which is the rules that govern the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and most of legislative bodies, including Congress in the country, the notion was that because someone was made in God's image, they were entitled to a certain level of respect. That's why we can't interrupt each other. That's why there's a Speaker of the House who presides, who is the arbiter. Now you may speak, now you may speak. And it's almost what we do as parents in our home. We say, now, your turn, raise your hand, and all that. And that is what we have lost, because in social media, there's nobody that is mediating that. What was my third point there?
Third one is idealism.
Yeah, idealism.
Which is a big one.
Nobody, there was a push up through people like John Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, where the president kind of set the call of the era. Said, for this era, we're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on conservation. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to focus on limiting the size of government. There's always a call to a generation. Idealism is what undergirds it all. That this is so much bigger than you and me. It's so much bigger than winning or losing this campaign.
And I think that chapter in your book,
yeah.
And I would encourage our listeners you're looking here you can get this book, because I want you to tell them how they can do that. Yeah. But these are all very, very important issues. Idealism is that reaching to something higher than ourselves. Right. If we don't do that, we're going to end up being groveling on the ground. Well, truth was your 4th chapter.
Yeah. In truth, I talked to 2 journalists, an old one and a young one. And Dan Rather, who for conservatives, I mean, when people hear the name Dan Rather, they go, uh-oh. This isn't going to be a chapter that I'll subscribe to, but I think what they'll find, that what Dan Rather is talking about in this chapter, is going back to the old norms of courtesy and civility and respect. Nobody lives up to them 100% of the time, and all the minutes that they are on the air or in a legislative body. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, what do you aspire to? And when you cannot, the complaint, I think, from journalists and the consumers of news is, if we can't agree to the facts of what is happening in the news. There was a school shooting, or there was a negotiations in North Korea, or there was a certain event in the news, and we don't agree to those facts, we can't even approach the discussion to say, well, I disagree. What we're doing now is literally dismissing, saying, I listen to those news sources, and you listen to yours, and you believe what you want to believe, and there's no longer any objective truth, and that is a big problem.
That's a big problem. Well, your last one is courage, because I thought that was a good anchor point, your 5th chapter. Courage, very critical. How does that fit into this?
It's critical because without courage, as Winston Churchill says, it undergirds all the other virtues. You have to be willing to take a risk for the causes that you believe are right and wrong. If for those of us who are in the social justice movement for the unborn, if you don't believe that there's a wrong being committed, or the generation before that fought against slavery, and you don't feel indignant enough to act on it, you've got to question what you're doing in politics, because there are a few issues that are defining society. How we approach it, the way we argue those debates is essential. But without courage, you're not doing anything but literally get reelected. And you and I have met many friends who have decided, I'm not going to tackle the big issues because I really have to get reelected first. But when they get reelected, they realize that all that courage evaporates because the next election is coming.
That's great. So I wish we could dig deeper into this, Jeff. These are excellent. How can somebody find the book?
They can go to Amazon, and they can get the Kindle version or the paperback, or go to withallduerespect.us and buy it there.
Okay, very good. Now, we don't have too much time as we conclude the program, but I want to go to at least 2 different points of solutions. We were talking before we got on the program the other day about this, and you made a point of saying that there is a principle about how this could be achieved. One of them was learn to agree on those issues where there can be agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, expand that on just a little bit.
Let me stick with the issue of abortion for a while. I met with, in a train station, a man who is on the other side of the issue, and he's a national leader and he's prominent. And I said, but you don't agree that abortion on demand should be the law of the land. You have stated a pro-choice position, but I'm pro-life. So how can we come together on this issue? And you know what he said? He said 3 words. He said, help pregnant women. I go, wow. If we just focused on that common ground of helping pregnant women, we may disagree what that is, what that looks like. But that is a great starting point to acknowledge that there's at least a problem. And there's a concern, and what folks on both sides need to agree on is what is the main issue, and it's women in crisis.
And Jeff, I know Isaac's got a question here. I just want to say this, but this is not agreeing on things that are not right.
Correct.
We're talking about agreeing on those things that are morally clear, defined by God, constitutionally cleared, or in agreement, those things that are true and right. Where there's agreement on those things, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you're never compromising on core principles
and I think
or
that's very
moral
key.
issues.
Yes.
What you are compromising on, where you're giving a little bit, is to say, I think that of the 90 things we disagree on, there's got to be an area, maybe one in 90 that we agree on. Could we work on that together? And what you find there is, yes, you're going to be ridiculed by people in your own camp, the ones who wear your jersey, for taking a position and standing with someone who's on the opposite side. But you're going to get more people looking at you saying, I can't believe that they broke from the pack and are actually agreeing on something that's important to me.
I think most people will find that encouraging when those things do happen that way. I think it is an encouragement. Sam, you were also in office for about 2 decades. What kind of a principle did you find, biblical principle work that you kind of lived by?
Well, Isaac, again, this is tough. This program's coming quick to a close. I'll just mention this one very quickly, and that is this. I know you agree with it, Jeff. praise those who do well, regardless of who they are, even if they are your opponent. And don't worry about who gets credit for it. That's a tough one in the political world. But I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's also a tough one, perhaps for in the regular world. How do you do these things? Well, you know what, Jeff, you know how tough that was to give credit. It seemed that if you give credit to your opponent, you've admitted weakness.
Yeah.
In reality, you've not admitted weakness. Generally at this point in the program, we bring it all together by saying, what does the individual do? What can the family do to correct this? What can the church do? What can civil government do? Well, really, if I could simplify this, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, on this issue of what we call negative campaigning, scorched earth campaigning, it comes back to we have to think of things as God would think. That's a biblical worldview. God created all. He made us all equal, sacred in His eyes. Therefore, we give due respect to all people because of who they are, and then we use our positions individually to make right choices, biblical choices. As a family and fathers and mothers, to teach them, and the church certainly to teach. And civil government, to praise those who do well biblically and to enact justice biblically. We've been listening to Stand in the Gap today. I'm Sam Rohrer and Isaac Crockett, our special guest, the Honorable Jeff Coleman, today on the theme of civility and bringing these things to bear and applying biblical principles really to these hard issues of the day. Communicate with us if you can by going to us, our website. Our address is right there. Write to us. Let us know if you appreciate these programs. American Pastors Network, 83 West Main Street, Suite 3, Alverson, Pennsylvania, 19520. See you back next time.